So, there's a new BBC programme out called Chess Masters the Endgame, which obviously I watched, presented by Sue Perkins and has David Howell on commentary. I felt a bit underwhelmed really with the first episode, as I don't think it's going to attract new people to the sport and the game quite in the same way as the Queen's Gambit did, which kind of got me back playing. But the bit that I was interested in was the games within there. So I was interested to take a look at the final one, which was played between Nick and Navi, and we're going to go through that on the screen in their showdown that they had. So let's have a look at that game. Started e4, which is kind of principled, and then e6 straight away, so we know we're going into a French. d4 the main line of it, and d5, so no shocks here. And then what kind of French are we going to have? Main options being pushing with e5 the advanced. You could maybe play c3, but the most common is knight c3 the classical, or knight to d2 the Tarrasch. And knight d2 Tarrasch is what we got. And then there's kind of several ways you can play this. You can kind of exchange it, or the interesting way of playing against this is c5, which is what we got as the response here. So c5 played, and again there's a couple of ways you can branch out here. c3, if that's played, ends up looking quite like an Alpine Sicilian, which you usually get after e4, c5, and then you can get some transpositions by playing c3. Would be looking like this, but we see our first kind of interesting move here with bishop b5, which I think is a bit of an inaccuracy, right? Because when you're playing the French, people know that the bad bishop for black in the French is their light squared bishop, and usually you spend the whole game saying this bishop's never getting out and it's never doing a lot. So by playing bishop b5, it allows black to block with their bishop, which they do, and then white trades this off, and black catches here with the knight. So from white, you've exchanged your light squared bishop, which can be quite a strong piece, for black's light squared bishop, which is a terrible piece in the position. So strategically, this doesn't make a lot of sense. If you're playing against the French, you want to keep that bishop kind of pegged in and not doing a lot in the game. So I thought this was white's first mistake strategically with what they tried to set out to do here. Well, the engine kind of likes it. It says it's plus 0.2, so it's saying actually it's okay to play like this. And then the next couple of moves, smacks through the centre with e takes d5 and takes back. And again, they then follow this up with d takes c5, which is backed by the engine, but again, I don't know if this is necessarily the best. Well, I kind of have some thoughts when I saw this. Usually when I see these kind of structures, if you're going to take here, it's likely that black wants to take back with their bishop. You can try and make or gain yourself a tempo in this by making black develop their pieces out first. So if they play like knight f6, they'll then want to develop their bishop out, so like bishop e7. At the point that they've moved their bishop once, that's usually a good time to take the pawn. So if you imagine you develop your knight out as white, let's just put it on the board, knight f3, they put their knight there, and you castle. Black's now kind of short of developing moves, and engine's saying, yeah, best move now is bishop e7. So at the point that they move their bishop, you force them to move it once. Now is quite a good time to take the pawn, because they move it twice. So rather than allowing them to do it in one move, you've kind of forced them to do it in two. So that's usually what I see when there's this kind of tension of the pawns, is you don't necessarily want to dissolve it straight away. You want to kind of wait and kind of kill some tempo with black doing it. However, I suppose in this particular case you can get away with it, because after black takes back, white can follow up with knight b3, which is the move they find in the game and in the programme. Kind of twofold now, so you're attacking the bishop and you're uncorking queen, attacking the pawn, which kind of puts black in a bit of a position about how they want to play it. They can play this sacrifice mode and dropping the bishop back to b6, just giving up the central d5 square and saying you can take it, but I'm going to get some development with my knights and get castled quickly with your king in the middle. Or you can try and defend this pawn, which isn't the easiest thing to do. So you could look at moves like knight here or knight here to defend the pawn, but then you're giving up your bishop because you allow a takes here and a trade. And black will be left with an isolated queen's pawn, which can be a strength or can be a weakness. I usually like to play against isolated queen's pawn, so I'd kind of take the white side of this given the chance. So I suppose the questions are, do you want to have an IQP, that isolated queen's pawn, with limited resources to defend against it, or play it energetically and drop the bishop back? Because the other way you could try and defend it would be with the queen, but the only square you could get to would be g5, but there's a white bishop staring at that, so that's not really an option. So in the game, black drops his bishop back to b6, saying I prefer to keep lines on here and I'll sacrifice a pawn in the process. So white gobbles that pawn on d5, which I think's kind of a sensible move. Engine kind of has this as equal, slightly preferable for black, -0.1. So even though white's up a pawn, it's saying black has enough counterplay by hitting the queen and getting castled, whilst the white king's in the centre, to say in practice this is a pretty even position. So black follows up now with knight f6, attacking the queen. Again, kind of gammoning a second pawn if you want to take it. So b7 is hanging, but this is quite a risky or greedy pawn for you to take, because if you go and take that second pawn, your queen's a bit offside, and black's going to now be in a position where they can castle and bring something to this open e-file, and all you can really do is block with your knight, and then your king's a bit stuck in the centre. You can't even block with your bishop because black has kept this bishop alive here. So I was thinking like moves like queen d6 was kind of interesting to prevent black from castling, but then there might be some follow-ups of like knight e4, or I think you just have to kind of retreat. You can't hit either of these squares because black's coordination stops you from providing a check. So Engine's saying dropping back to d3 is the best move here, but we saw in the game was white got greedy, they saw a pawn that was hanging, so they took the pawn that was hanging. Now the Engine gives this as favourable for black. We're getting towards a -1 position now. So they're down 2 pawns, but they've got a favourable position, purely because of the activity and the fact that the white king's going to get scrambled in the centre pretty soon. So what do we get? Castles from black, and now white needs to kind of decide pretty quickly what they're doing about their king, who's quite bare. Like if you just go normal developing moves, knight f3, then your king's going to get hit on the e-file. And you'll probably be forced to play king f1, and then this rook becomes a really terrible piece. And also this bishop's a bit of a monster down to the f2 square, and with follow-up moves like the knight being able to jump to e or g4, this f2 pawn's going to be in some trouble. So white's got some problems that they need to kind of fix. It says actually best is to put your bishop on e3, trade it off, leave yourself with an isolated e pawn, and probably leave it there to be captured and try and get a quick queenside castles in if they'll let you. That's probably the line that's best for white to go for. Sack a pawn back to get your king to safety. You'll be up a pawn in that line, so you don't mind giving one back. But in the game, knight e2, and now we're getting up to that -1 position again, and this just gives black all the fun and all the kind of initiative and activity here. So they start with rook e8, kind of sensible move, makes a lot of sense. Ties down the knight, means that white can't castle, otherwise they'll be dropping the knight. And again, it's quite difficult to unravel yourself from this position. Like ideally you try and make the knights protect each other, but you can't put it there because it just gets captured by the bishop, and white can't take back because of this pin. And if you put the bishop there, again it's probably the best move in the position. You're accepting a trade and giving the pawn back, and you've still got some problems to solve here. You can't even bring like your king up because the knight will hit your king and defend the rook. So white's in quite a not a great position here, and they kind of compound their misery. Bringing the queen back, it looks sensible defending the knight, but you just give black a load of activity now with their pieces, -4 after that move. If black plays the critical line, which they find, of knight e5, attacking this queen, it temporarily obstructs the rook from coming down, but it does unleash your queen, so this d1 square could become an efficient infiltration if black ever tries to play like king f1 or things like that to try and run away. So we're attacking the queen. You really want to stay connected to your knight, but you're having a tough time doing it. The squares you need to stay connected are these ones, and they're all taken. None of these squares you can go to, you just lose your queen. So then it's a case of what's the next best square, and you kind of got downsides regardless of where you go. They choose queen h3 to go to, and now it's going to be a combination of these two weak squares which black can kind of target together. So best move is putting one of your knights on g4 just to double attack this f2 pawn, and there's no real decent way of defending against this f2 pawn. And actually we see this in the game. They bring their f knight, which I think is slightly worse than bringing the e knight. Bringing the other one makes a bit more sense because your rook's then free to pin down this knight again. But they go with the f knight. Doesn't make too much difference. You're still in a totally dominant position here. And again, you're on the f2 pawn. What are you going to do to defend against it? Well, best move just put a bishop in the way, can get away with castling in a couple of moves time. You're probably still not in a great spot, but I think that's the best option you've got. Instead, White went for something that kind of looks like it solves their problems, but actually ends up in a totally lost position. They castle, which looks good, right? You've now got two defenders against the pawn that's attacked twice. So in the usual scheme of things, Black would take, you take, they take there. You've picked up two minor pieces for a rook and a pawn, and usually that's pretty good going. You're happy with that as White, but in this particular position, it just doesn't work. And as you'll see, so Knight takes on f2, and I suppose the power of this is that it's attacking the queen. So you'll need to move your queen somewhere, and White gets a free discovery by moving their knight out the way. The other option, as we'll see in the game, is like I say, I'm going to get two pieces here for it, so I take back with the rook. But Black isn't forced to take this rook. They can say, oh, actually, your king's super weak. I've got this file for my queen to come down on and give her this nasty check. And not only is it a nasty check, but when it comes down, you're not able to block it with your rook because of this pin. So the bishop is lined up against the rook and the king, so the rook can't move, such that when the queen comes down, that's just a checkmate in one move. So we see queen d1, checkmate, and that's the end of the game. So it was interesting. I think White didn't help themselves in some of their setup, trading off the light squared bishops, not great, and getting really greedy, gobbling the pawns wasn't great. I think from Black was pretty solid. They understood how to play the position and that they were able to sacrifice the pawns. Maybe with stronger play from White, they could have solidified a bit better, but Black can only beat what's in front of them, and they did well there. So it was interesting running it through League Chess. The next interesting part was to look at it on chess.com. So it's interesting to put the game review through here to see. I basically wanted to see what accuracy they had and what proposed ratings they got given. I don't know what ratings they are in real life. I think a quick googling said between 16 1700, and I think when they were kind of showing snippets of it, there was some kind of basic pins and whatnot in there that makes me think it's not going to be too high rated. But look at this. White played 65, 66% accuracy. Black played 96% accuracy. So a super good game from Black. 8 best moves, no mistakes, no blunders, no misses. So kind of a really clean game. It gave a game rating of 2500, which I doubt is their strength, but you never know. And 1550 for White. So I mean, it was only 15 moves, but it was just interesting to see what Chess.com made for that game.